I choose diversity. Because who wants a one flavor world? Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're located on this beautiful planet of ours. But wherever you are, you're welcome in our studio, I should say. I was going to say in our home, but I guess this is a virtual home. Thank you for tuning back into the Panacea9 by Gloria Y podcast. And for those of you who are just finding this episode, welcome. If you like, you can go back and watch the first two episodes. This is our third one. Now, in the first two episodes, I spent some time explaining the name Panacea, why I chose it, and what it means in the broader context of these podcasts. I also spoke about the story of the Seymour. I guess that you would say that is the Persian equivalent of the phoenix, that mythical, majestic, magical bird. I felt that it was necessary to use those two mythologies, one from Greek mythology and one from Persian mythology, to explain the bigger vision of these podcasts, why we're doing them, and why we would like you to be engaged. Now, I promise you, we will have other people. You won't always have to listen to me. We will have other people who are knowledgeable, who are experienced, who are educated, and they will be speaking about topics that are of utmost importance to our society at large and to our global community, the community of humankind. I also believe that before we get there, before we actually start touching on those very important subjects and gaining knowledge from the people who will be sharing their ideas, it's important that you know who I am and why I'm doing this, why I do anything that I do, and why you would be interested in following my podcasts, or read my poetry, or watch my films, or do anything else that you may be inclined to do with regards to my projects. I am going to speak more about myself during this episode, but I don't want you to think that it's coming from a place of pride or ego. It comes from a place where I want you to know who you're trusting. You need to know where all of whatever it's in my heart and whatever is in my head comes from. And that's why I think it's important that you get to know the real Gloria Yazdani. So let me start by speaking a little bit about my childhood. Now, I don't know how far back people remember whatever it is that they recall, and I'm sure that everyone's trajectory is different. But I think that what I'm recalling probably goes back to when I was about 5 or 6 years old. They're probably my earliest memories. My parents were from a very small village, Kushkak, near the small town of Abade. I was myself born in Shiraz, but for the period of time that we lived in Iran, while I had been in the world, we mostly lived in the southern city of Abadan, which was relatively more liberal than all the other cities in Iran at the time. And that was mainly because of the presence of so many British and American employees of the National Oil Company and the National Petrochemical Company, both of which were in Abadan. And there was also a huge refinery, probably the biggest in the Middle East if I'm not smoking. The Western influence was very discernible in Abadan, and the lifestyles of many mirrored the British and the Americans in the city. My family too was relatively more liberal-minded than many other families in Iran. My parents had traveled to Europe, throughout the continent, I should say, and many parts in Asia, and they were quite open-minded when it came to a lot of things, but of course not everything, just like anybody else. My love of dance and the performing arts in general was uncanny from a very, very early stage in my life. Some may say I was a show-off from babyhood, and I still am, I guess. I remember dancing anywhere and to any tune whatsoever, which as a little girl, of course, was considered cute, very cute, but sadly with no artistic value attached to it, of course. You may ask why? Well, because no one, not even in my open-minded family, in an open-minded city, would even think of it as art. Dance was a frivolous thing, right? Anyway, point is, it was simply cute that a little girl, from the time that she was a baby, would start moving to music and entertain family and friends. I also loved listening to the news. I know, strange, but I did. And not just news, all sorts of dramatic presentations, and news could get pretty dramatic. I'm not crazy. I would listen to them and then I would mimic them in front of the family, standing on a raised platform, whether it was a chair or a bed or just a pile of pillows. I would create my own stage, my own little stage, and give my soliloquies, which of course gave a headache to everyone. But for me, they were the foundation of my utopian life of make-believe, in which I wrote, produced, and staged my own productions, painting the world with beautiful colors of love, fellowship, and peace, instead of the darkness reflected in the news whenever the TV was on. It's strange to think that a 5, 6, or 7-year-old girl being raised in a relatively comfortable household could see in great depth the heinousness of the world in which we lived, or that she could understand pain and suffering to that extent. Most people think that empathy is acquired and developed over time, but for me, that was not the case. Perhaps I saw more and felt more because I watched the news or read well from a very early age. And perhaps I was just observant. When I saw beggars on the street, the image didn't leave my mind easily. I lived with it. I felt it. I touched it. And I wept for it. Even at a tender age, I didn't think we should move on from difficult issues and live our lives oblivious of what was happening to others. When I heard the news of war, it wasn't just information for me. I tried to absorb and understand what it meant and feel the consequences. I traveled in my mind to places of war and walked through the injured bodies. I gave them water and provision and yes, wept uncontrollably. I didn't let war become historical statistics. These things should not become historical statistics. For the little girl who was me at the time, war was a bitter reality, something that didn't matter to most people if it weren't directly affecting their lives. Of course, there was so much more atrocity that I had not even heard about in those formative years of my life. For example, I was oblivious of racism. I didn't even know what race or racism was. Of human trafficking, of domestic abuse, and so much more. What was crystal clear to me, though, and pained me severely, was the fact that for most people, it didn't affect them if it didn't happen to them. All the horrible things on the news was just information, perhaps even entertainment. I observed people follow it closely and talk about it endlessly over dinners, over tea visits, in the supermarkets or family picnics. But they were merely focusing on it as a world affair matter, which is okay. They were talking about it as a game between the nations, and that bothered me. It wasn't a game between the nations. I felt what was missing in all the discourse was real empathy for the people who were directly affected. There was, of course, some sympathy in the discourse, but did anyone really sleep? But did anyone really lose sleep over it? Even the little me was stubborn and bold and persistent. So I wouldn't let it go. I would bring it up and speak about it in my own childish, excited way. But of course, I was too young and therefore too naive, and I couldn't let things affect me personally so much. I want to be brief. I think you can get the point. I remember analyzing everything in my little head and often crying for the slightest thing that seemed unpleasant to me. And so I was quickly labeled too sensitive, too emotional, idealistic, and unrealistic. I got endless speeches as to why my sensitivity was pointless and self-destructive, and how it would never amount to any real progress for anyone, myself or others. I was told a myriad of times that I was too young to understand reality, and that when I grew up, I would be able to think logically and not let everything affect me so deeply. How can I grow up and not care? It just wasn't going to work out with me. Well, the little me was scared of joining the crowd in being and feelingly realistic. I decided early on that I would never change, that I would always care, and that I would do everything I could in my powers to help the world. I cried myself to sleep many nights, promising myself to stay true to who I was. And I kept encouraging myself with the hopes of growing up and being able to change the world. But I also decided to keep all of those thoughts to myself until I was old enough to do as I wish, or until I was old enough to be taken seriously. Well, I did grow up, and I tried. Did I fail? Of course I did. But is failure the end? Of course not. Isn't it just a start for trying again? Okay, so here I am, officially declaring my failure to change the world. It's not that simple of a statement to make, though. It's not black and white. It's simply not a one-man or a one-woman show. I know I succeeded in one thing, and that was not giving up what was classified as idealism in my childhood. But sadly, in my youth, I became self-absorbed and wasn't quite as faithful to my ideals of changing the world as I should have been. I think my ego got in the way. I was the talk of the school here in Canada for my ability to perform and affect an audience. In my first year in Canada, with my broken English, or should I say non-existent English, I entered a public speaking contest of all contests and went against native English speakers. I chose to talk about poverty and hunger in a community that knew nothing about such matters. Broken as my English was, and out of touch as the school community was with hunger and such adversities, there was not one dry eye in the audience. I realized then how I could change the world. Well, I mean how I could help change the world. Remember, not a one-man show. There was no doubt in my mind that I needed to get into the performing arts and use the power of such arts to penetrate into the hearts and souls of my audience and make a difference, one beautiful heart at a time. When it came time for university, I knew it was a moot point. But I told my parents I wanted to go into theater. I had already applied secretly and written my 2,000-word essay and even auditioned Ryerson theatrical program. And I was accepted from amongst a great number of applicants. I did all of that just for the sake of knowing that I could. But I knew my parents would never let me. And they didn't. When I finally found the courage to bring it up, my father used his parental authority and threw an adult tantrum about how naive I was and how childish and how I couldn't decipher from childish vanity and doing or studying the right thing. It was that word naive again that I had heard so many times in my childhood, coming right back and hitting me in the face. So wisdom took over and I shut up, just like I had as a child. I kept my silence and after some struggle decided to enter Ryerson anyway in their business program and do theater as a minor secretly without anyone's knowledge. Most of my teenage years and 20s I spent living in secret. Being a grown-up was not as easy as I had thought it would be when I was a child. I had been all wrong. How did I ever think I could do anything I wanted when I grew up? Because whatever I did affected my family and those around me. And the hopeless, empathic me could not bear to bring any more heartbreak to my family that I already had. Oh, how complicated, intricate, and complex life is. How painful when you cannot be who you are. And if you try, you only end up hurting people who love you. You hurt your loved ones with the hopes of helping others. Another thing about me, I never drank or did drugs. None of that. But I danced my sorrows away. I danced to the point of intoxication. But that had its own problems. It's not one or two things, especially when you're a woman. I was considered attractive as a young woman and a good dancer, which gave permission to many men of all ages and ranks, men of high standing in my community, relatives and friends of family, to approach me with their sick, demented propositions. Like many other women, I was a piece of meat, neatly placed on a dish for a hungry man to devour. Sickening as it was, I had no outlet. I had no refuge, like so many other women. Who would believe me? Would they say it was my fault? Yes, they would. Definitely would and did. Would they give me comfort and assure me that I had done nothing wrong? No, they wouldn't. They didn't. I was alone. Always alone in a crowd of people who admired my body, my dance. But then again, dance was my only refuge, the only intoxication I enjoyed. So perplexing is an understatement. That was another decision I made in my 20s. I wanted no woman to feel that sort of loneliness and lack of support. I decided women had to be proud of their femininity and not blame their so-called attractiveness for the unchaste eyes of horrible men. I don't wish for any woman ever to doubt her worth because of other idiots or those idiots' standards. Oh, I wish for a free and equal world for women everywhere, for everyone everywhere. Please, God, don't let my tears, my inner struggles and work be in vain. Okay, so maybe you know a little more about me now. You'll get to know more about me as we go on, and you can ask whatever you want. I don't believe in hiding behind veils of any kind. I am open. I'm an open book, and I will answer everything. And I think that my struggles, my personal struggles, have made me who I am. So was there pain involved? Yes. But is there glory in it? Is there triumph in it? Is there victory in it? Yes. Because that has prompted me to want to help change the world. So anyway, stay with me. Watch our episodes. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media platforms everywhere. Thank you so much for tuning in, and see you next week. I love you all. I love humanity. One world, one family.